from Florida, the gentleman, Mr. Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick comment on spending levels. The federal agencies are spending more than up over 40% from where they were in pre-COVID spending levels. COVID-19 is now over. I'm not sure what additional work the agencies are having to do, except for backlog work that the agencies were not able to get to because a lot of federal workers were at home and not actually in the office going through the practices that they are hired to do. And look, I get it. It was COVID-19. You're not quite sure what you're dealing with. That made sense in year one, but year two and year three, that made little sense to continue to leave the offices closed or on partial schedules. And from what we understand from previous testimony from the Director of Office of Personnel Management, that there are still members of the federal workforce who have not returned to the office, still, today. Like, that's a significant problem. Cutting money from the federal agencies because we continue to overspend drastically is a good and healthy fiscal thing that we should be doing in our country. And if that means that there are services that our people need and that are going to need, then maybe Washington should rethink its policy overall to make sure that we can address the needs of the American people while not wasting the money of the American people. To the witness panel, thanks for being here. I'm going to pose a couple of questions here. Really just, you can answer whether it's acceptable or not. Ms. Bitter, I'm going to start with you. A government that enforces an essential business-only policy while simultaneously paying its employees full salaries while millions of Americans wait inexcusable amounts of time for basic required services, is that acceptable or not?
I'm sorry, sir. The question is
if
broadly speaking.
we develop an essential businesses only policy, but everybody's still getting paid full time, full benefits, while Americans are having to wait exorbitant amount of times, and frankly, they have to call their member of Congress to help weed through the bureaucracy. Is that acceptable? Or is it not acceptable?
I just want to make sure I understand the question,
Sure.
Sir. Please forgive me. So essential businesses only, I think what I hear you asking is about parts of the government that were closed except to essential services. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Is that acceptable or not?
I can speak only for my organization and for the passport services, which I think is what people are most interested in. We have been, again, open since June of 2020, and while the pandemic certainly disrupted our operations, we never stopped serving the public throughout for the entirety of the time.
I would argue it's been very delayed. Mr. Levins, what about you? Is that acceptable or not?
Thank you for your question. I'll never forget March of 2020 and the day that the pandemic hit.
Mr. Levins, I agree. I was there too. We all remember March of 2020. The question is, in September of 2020, in March of 2021, in September of 2021, in March of 22, is it still acceptable for the American people to require services of their government only to not be able to get them in a timely fashion because we have members of the federal workforce who are not at their post doing their job? Right. Is that acceptable or not?
I'll speak for our office. We never entirely closed. From day one, we had people there to perform essential services.
Thank you, Mr. Levins. Mr. Poist, is that acceptable or not?
So like the other two panelists, our offices never closed to the public. They were by appointment only.
Mr. Poist, let me ask you a question. What percentage of your workforce was actually in the office in the calendar year of 2021? I'm going to excuse you for 2020. I get it. Early pandemic, everybody's trying to figure out what was going on. Was your office fully open in 2021?
They were not fully open.
Were they fully open in 2022?
They were.
They were fully open. Everybody was back to work 100% in 2022. Well, obviously not 100%. We know people get sick, people call out. But you had essentially your entire workforce available to you in the year 2022?
At the end of March 2022, we had fully re-entered our offices.
So it took about a year and a half for everybody to kind of come back in SSA, is that correct?
That's correct.
And there's no problem with that delay in people coming back to work?
I don't see a problem.
That's the problem, Mr. Poise, is that you don't see a problem with that. But I tell you right now, the American people see a big problem with that. When people call my office, and listen, this is not a partisan thing. It could be it could be an office of a Republican member or a Democrat member of Congress, doesn't matter. But when people call in looking for help from Social Security or passport services, they're trying to figure out how to get something done, they're not getting an answer, they get hung up on the phone, so they call our offices. And when we call, and I get it, when we call, everybody's jumping through hoops to answer the call of a congressional office. You guys don't think there's a problem with that? Because I do. Listen, we will take care of every constituent request. It doesn't matter who the constituent is. But when the only answer a constituent gets is from their member of Congress to basically rattle the cages of the bureaucracy, that is a major problem. And it is unacceptable. I yield back.